kid. That's some 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 kid. I see you. That's some kid. 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 That's some kid.
All right, welcome back to Some Kid. We are going to be looking at principle number 5. We just finished up principle number 4, which was platforming your students. Now we're going to be looking at principle number 5, which is identity. So how do we examine our students' identity? How do we affirm their identity? How do we encourage them to be who they need to be and put that faith in them so that they say, I am some kid? And so we're going to be looking at 3 chapters for this particular principle. That's chapters 13, 14, and 15. So in chapter 13, we see Charlotte beginning her next, because she recognizes right now that it is not enough to save Wilbur. I mean, you would think that writing words in a web would be enough, but it's not. She knows that this is a much longer journey to save him than just a one-off experience. And so what you see from Charlotte here is you see her creativity coming out, you see her perseverance. And also one of the things that I love is on page 94, you see her engaging in a bit of self-talk. So she's talking to herself. She's saying, now up for the R, up we go, attach, descend, pay out the line, whoa, attach, good. I feel like a lot of times as teachers, when we're putting in the work, it can be exhausting. There's this high that comes with helping students the first time. You're like, oh, that was so great. I feel like such a good person. And then the student comes back and they're like, here's another issue. Or and you recognize, oh, they're going to be with me for 9 months. This is a long-term thing. And so you can kind of get down on yourself. But what we see from Charlotte is not only is she building a web, but she's saying positive things to herself. She's saying, okay, easy on those lines. We got this. And so Charlotte is creative. She's speaking that creativity out there. And that's basically what's happening in chapter 10. And then we see the word terrific. And then I believe Templeton goes to the trash dump and he finds that word radiant. And not only that, this is where we see, speaking of the principle of identity, this is where we see Wilbur find his identity. So he, up to this point, he's been enjoying the attention, but when Charlotte says radiant, that's going to be the word with new radiant action. Wilbur, she called, this is on page 100. Run around. I want to see you in action to see if you are radiant. Now back faster. And he gallops and he jumps. And then he eventually does a backflip with a half twist. And I think he lands it. And so what you see Wilbur like he's trying to become radiant. She's saying, here's a word I want you to be. Can you be this? Can you step up to this? And so you see him start to find his identity. I am some kid. I am terrific. I am radiant. And he actually starts to embody what she's saying. So, think about how far we've come. We've come from a student in our classroom who doesn't have any faith, who's lost trust. And what we've done is we've created this connection. We've got this community. They have faith. We've now platformed them. And we've platformed them to such a degree with their peers and with the broader community that now they are starting to say, oh, this is more than just what's happening in this space. This is what I'm going to take with me. This is my identity. I am an artist. I am this. I am that. I am some kid. And so they start to carry it with them, just like Wilbur's doing in this chapter. In chapter 14, we once again get to, this is where the mom is talking to the doctor. The mom is wondering, is Fern okay, dealing with all these different animals? And so once again, we go back to the parents, and we'll talk about that a little bit. And then we have chapter 15, which is titled The Crickets. This is where they, in the book, where they decide the Zuckerman family is going to go to the fair. And Wilbur asks her if she can go to the fair. And Charlotte says, in this chapter, she says, well, I don't know. The fair comes at a bad time for me. I shall find it inconvenient to leave home, even for a few days. And she says that she's going to be laying her eggs. So if we move on a little bit more to chapter 14, what we see here is we see another parent, in this case, parent-doctor conversation. So we're once again going back to this idea of parents. And one of the things that I think is so interesting about this is that the parent is reaching out and saying, like, my daughter's, there's just something different about her and the way that she relates to these animals, and I don't quite understand it. And one of the things that really stood out to me was when I had my school, we would have anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour of journaling every day. I mean, by halfway through the year, it was just so deep that my students were developing degrees of emotional intelligence because they would journal, and then we would take as much time as we needed within the time parameters to discuss what was going on in their journals. So they would be talking about conflicts they would be having with each other. Sometimes students would be crying as they shared their journals, different things like that. And so we really started to see them developing emotional intelligence. And there was one point halfway through the year where one of the parents came up to me and she was like, "Hey, I need your guys' help because my daughter has developed beyond me." She said, "My daughter is now counseling me." Like when things are going on and I'm having trouble controlling my emotions, my daughter is now counseling me on how to deal with this. And she's like, "That's a problem because I'm the parent, I'm the one who's supposed to be," and she was worried about the dynamics of everything. And so we were able to walk with her and through that. And so all that to say, when you start to get your students to say, "I am some kid," and their identity starts to shift, that's going to make itself apparent at home as well. So they're going to take that home and their parents are going to say, "They're so much more confident. There's so much more, they're enjoying school so much more. This is just a different reality than I'm used to." And so I just wanted to touch on that because it's not necessarily a bad thing, but when a student's identity and who they are, when they start to make connections at school starts to change, they start taking that home, and then it gives the parent a whole new situation that they have to deal with than they had before. It's good, but it's different, which means that, that level of communication still needs to be there so you can have those conversations and say, "Here's what we're doing in class. Here's what I see your student doing. Here's kind of who they're becoming amongst their peers. And here's how you can encourage them, in the home space. Is there anything I can do at school to reinforce what you're doing at home?" And so just keeping that two-way conversation open with students, which I think definitely in my case, that was there because I had such a close-knit relationship. And I usually do have such close-knit relationships with my student parents that they feel that they can talk about those things. So this last chapter, which is chapter 15 in this section, we see Wilbur asking Charlotte to go to the fair with him. Now, up to this point, Charlotte has given so much. She has described him as some pig, as terrific, as radiant, 3 times written in the web, and still everything isn't guaranteed, but she's given all that anybody could ask her to give. I mean, now she's looking at her priorities and saying, my eggs, my children are my priority. But Wilbur's still asking. And so I think that what I love here is that Charlotte, unlike me early on in my teaching career, where it's just I'm just going to cross boundary after boundary and just what do you need me to do? What do you need me to do? What do you need me to do? We have lives as teachers outside of school.
Yes.
And there are priorities that we have outside of our students. And so I think what Charlotte does here is she's drawing a really clear boundary with Wilbur and saying, if I can, I've done everything I could up to this point, but now we're talking about things that are impacting my life and things like that. And so, just on the topic of identity, and I know this is kind of a wide stretching section, but we're talking about, in the first chapter, we're talking about the student identity, which is Wilbur. In the second chapter, we're talking about that identity in relationship to the parents. But then I also think that if we don't talk about the teacher's identity, we start to get lost, because if you don't know who you are as a teacher, and part of that is knowing which boundaries to set, saying, no, I can't stay after school for 5 hours. No, I can't stay up at home grading for 8 hours every single night. No, I can't. And again, I crossed all these boundaries early on in my career.
I totally understand, because I used to want to bring students home into our family.
Yeah.
I'd say, but this person, they're under Child Protective Services and they have no mom. Maybe we should adopt them.
Yeah.
And I could have adopted many children over the years if your father hadn't said, we have 4 children.
Yeah.
We need to look at these priorities.
Yeah, exactly. And you have to, and you honestly either learn this the hard way or not. I got burnt so many times just by prioritizing the wrong things or just putting too much time and energy into things that ultimately they were beyond my control. But I was trying to control them because that's how I had my identity wrapped up in things. And that's where
you also had a heart for people, a very big heart for people, and drawing the boundary.
Yeah. But that's what I'm talking about, though, is that people who typically tend to have a heart for students, who care for students, they can lose themselves in the mission of being a teacher. They can lose themselves in the role of helping people because it feels good. And what we're talking about here is just, you have to also keep in mind your identity as a teacher. You need to take care of your priorities so that you can be, like Wilbur sleeping, like being primed, so that you can be primed to help your students in the ways that you can. And so I absolutely love that Charlotte, we see this from her. She's not just this like suffering spider and, oh man, I have to serve Wilbur, because that's not a friendship. That's not true connection. She's actually able to be herself. She has the choice to say yes or to say no, and Wilbur has to deal with it. And at the end of the day, we are different than our students, and our students need to know that we're different than them. And they may be disappointed sometimes when we say no, or I'm sorry, I can't do that. I can't come to this game because I have to spend time with my children.
Exactly.
But they have to know that, and then that allows them to know where the boundaries are. And then it also reaffirms our identity in both sides. It says, I'm a parent in our eyes because I'm prioritizing my child. But to them, they go, oh, he's a parent. Of course he can't come to my game. He has to hang out with his kid. And so when you're talking about identity, I mean, that's what these 3 chapters are about. And that's what we want you all to discuss. So again, the 3 types of identity: student identity, how they see themselves, how that identity connects at home and relates to their parents or their caregivers. And then third, your identity and the boundaries that you might be letting people cross. Or just, again, we'll talk a little bit later how crossing boundaries isn't necessarily a bad thing, but you also need to know who you are, and you need to take time to understand who you are and draw those boundaries so that everybody in your school community knows that. All right, so that's principle number 5. We're almost there.
Yes.
Have a great time with your discussion, and we'll see you next time.